Hello, friends, and welcome to the latest installment in your favorite book review series. This month's book, The Final Girl Support Group. And let me just say, I was pretty ecstatic that one of my books was finally picked for book club. So ecstatic that I procrastinated reading half of the book until the week before book club. This had an unforeseen pro to it though. Since I procrastinated reading so much of the book for so long, I read the remainder in 2 long sessions. I was probably reading for 2 to 3 hours a session, which is a lot for me. One pro that came from this though is that the majority of the book is still pretty fresh in my mind. Another pro is that I couldn't sit and just listen to the audiobook for hours on end and stare at the wall. I found myself getting distracted by the lack of visual stimulus. I spent a while tossing a ball in the air, cleaning the room, doing laundry, and none of it was working. None of it just provided enough visual stimulus long enough for me to finish the book. In the end, I did find something that worked to keep my attention while I read, and it actually allowed me to speed up the rate of the audiobook. I turned on the subtitles. Getting the book on the Kindle app was actually kind of a pro gamer move. The documents that are interspersed between chapters come across really weird and jarring in the audiobook, and getting to see the unique way the documents are displayed in the book gave them a lot more meaning. Still not much, I found them kind of boring and non-memorable, but it was better than nothing. Another problem I have with the audiobook that I didn't realize until I started reading along, the narration is painfully slow. At the default one-time speed, the audiobook is a 13-hour long recording. That's just 3 hours less than the Rose Code, and I personally feel like a lot more happens in the Rose Code. Moving away from the way that the audiobook is formatted and onto the content of the book itself, I thought it was overall pretty good. Lynette was an interesting character, let's say. At first, I was definitely with her on being paranoid after surviving not one but two slasher scenarios. But when she started committing literal crimes, I would find myself drifting to thoughts of her just being crazy and thinking the whole thing up. Then I would remember that her apartment was actually shot up and someone actually got hit and someone actually went to the hospital. So there was no way that it was all dreamt up. The first half of the book was pretty boring and unmemorable to me. Aside from Lynette's visit to Dr. Carroll's, where she meets Dr. Carroll's children. One innocuous comic book transaction later, things started blending together. I had imagined the majority of the book was going to be like a slasher movie with people getting axed or finding themselves in predicaments that brought about their demise. This is why I didn't really tune in much to the plot until the party at Marilyn's house and the Michelle heist. It was also here where I clued into the fact that Lynette isn't really as smart or as clever as she seems. She prepares a lot, but when push comes to shove, she ends up making mistakes that get people killed just like in the horror movies. Getting caught trying to sneak into not one but two houses throughout the book. I will say though, I'd probably be worse off than Lynette in this exact same scenario. As she's trying to piece the puzzle together of who her mysterious attacker could be, I was with her the entire time. The logic all made sense, and whenever there was a plot twist, I saw the flaws in the pre-twist solution, and the newly presented solution made absolute sense. So when Stephanie betrays Lynette at the end, I was super unprepared for it. She gets hit in the back of the head and I go, by who? The only one that was behind her was Stephanie. If I had to pick one chapter from this book that sticks out in my mind the most, I'd have to pick the chapter at Chrissy's house. This girl Chrissy is absolutely insane, and the way that Lynette acts in this chapter is almost just as crazy. I'm not even talking about Lynette luring Chrissy out and then following her home. Okay, you're cautious, cool, but why are you gonna leave this poor defenseless girl in the car by herself in the dark with nothing but pepper spray, which you've said doesn't even work? And that's even before she steps out of the vehicle. Once she's inside, she allows Chrissy to lead her through this Resident Evil 7-ass house into its deepest, darkest basement, all to read a few emails. Emails that implicate the wrong person, by the way. I do like the personal growth that Lynette shows in this chapter. When she bolted, I thought she was really just going to leave Stephanie, and then I was disappointed, but she comes back and saves that day. Stephanie's character is also super interesting to me. When she's introduced, her detached attitude is attributed to her trauma, but then so is her willingness to leave her parents immediately, her maniacal laughter in the car, and the very slow and measured response to all of Lynette's questions. I think the tells of the twist are easy to spot with hindsight, but I guess that's why they say hindsight is 20/20. So the last thing I wanted to touch on real quick is the way in which Lynette, the super paranoid shut-in, carries a 22 for self-defense. When it was initially introduced, I thought it was kind of comical. Sure, you can kill someone with a 22, but with the type of monsters that these girls have been facing, a 22 isn't keeping them down. So it was kind of a red flag for me that Lynette chose to carry one for the majority of the novel. Of course, that lack of significant firepower works out for her in the end when she shot with that very same 22 in the back of the head. In the heat of the moment, I totally forgot about both the caliber of the pistol that she had been shot with and her reinforced rear skull. Definitely thought the book was going to switch to the perspective of someone else, and my mind was thinking about which of the other actual slasher actresses was going to narrate the rest of the book. But that might have just been me desperately wanting a different narrator. Oh yeah, I think it was mentioned in the group chat, but the narrator of the audiobook is Adrienne King, the actress who played the final girl Alice in Friday the 13th. There's your real world research for this book. I'm also definitely adding Silent Night, Deadly Night to my horror movies to watch list too. All in all, I think this book takes a little too long to get rolling, but once it does, it's a fun time. Full of twists I didn't see coming, and a great canonization of all of the 80s slasher movies. I'm sure if you were a Chrissy level superfan of all the parodied franchises, you'd get a lot more out of the book and its characters than I did, as you already know their personalities going into that. Without that, however, it's still a good book. One whose recommendation score is deserving of an if you listen to the audiobook, and a yes if you listen to it with the subtitles, or just solely read, and it's one that I'll be adding to the list of 4 franchises that kill black characters first. Maybe I'll put it at the top of the list, considering how it goes out of its way to retcon a final girl to be black after she dies.